Well, good evening and welcome everyone. So thank you for joining us in this virtual happy hour session organized by Dan and Montreal. We appreciate you taking some time of your Tuesday evening, so we promise to make this session as fun and as interactive as possible. For that, be free to choose your favorite drink. The idea of this session is really simple, right? We want you to ask all the questions that you have on mind. So this session is dedicated to answer all of these questions and nothing else. There will be no prepared presentation, and we've already received a lot of your questions through the poll, so thank you for that. So we will dedicate the first part of the session to answer these. And if you haven't sent any of these questions, don't worry. We will dedicate the last part of the session to answer some more live. So don't hesitate to do this by either typing the question, or if you prefer, Mayo, our event manager now, is making a panelist, so you can choose to unmute and speak directly with the speaker. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy a nice drink. Dr. Deeming, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, Ryan, I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody. I've done a few webinars over the last year, and I've done two things differently tonight. And one of which is I've turned my chair around and I've put on a shirt. And I'm feeling a bit odd. I'm quite discombobulated. So
you're looking good. You're looking good.
So in honor in the UK, I don't know if you heard that the Prime Minister announced our route out of lockdown yesterday. So I thought I would celebrate by putting on, a lackluster grey shirt and moving my chair as some kind of celebration. But anyway, yeah, welcome. Let's see how we get on. This is really exciting to have this opportunity.
Well, I don't know if this is a sign that life is getting back to normal, or, this is the new normal, that I haven't seen you like this before, guy.
We're finding out a lot about each other this evening, apparently, Ryan. So.
Exactly. The virtual world made us closer.
Indeed so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
to kickstart this session, maybe I will start by taking some questions that we received from the audience. How about that?
Sure. Go for it.
Perfect. So the first question, when we talk about SmileMate, in particular, virtual consultation, we have a lot of people who ask us, I'm already using Zoom or Skype or whatever this video call, platform is using to do these virtual consultation, which is basically free. So, why should they switch to SmileMate, which is, paying?
So there's lots of different answers to that question, I guess, aren't there? And it rather depends on what you're trying to achieve. But I think fundamentally, when we, if we go back to when virtual consultations became a thing people talked about, a year ago, just under, with any kind of volume, Zoom was there as a sticking plaster. So it got us through. But what you don't have, it's a little bit like it was in the good old days, when you would have a camera, and then maybe you'd have a mobile telephone, and then maybe you'd have an MP3 player. So you'd have to have all these different things in your bag or in your pocket, and they were all kind of great on their own terms. But then guess what happened in 2007? The iPhone came along, and suddenly everything joined up together. And then there is no going back. And it's a little bit like that with SmileMate. And I think that, whilst I think it's probably fair to say SmileMate is not quite going to have the same impact as the iPhone, the idea of bringing that functionality that you need to do the jobs that you're trying to do into one package so that it becomes part of your kind of, let's call it lead acquisition or patient acquisition and management. And then it takes you through all of those key steps of that consultation journey without needing to go from one piece of software into the next piece of software. And it also has some functionality built into that, which is sort of there in things like Zoom, but you've got to hunt for it and you've got to fiddle with it because it's designed for that niche orthodontic or dental purpose. So it's designed with the end in mind. So it becomes a much smoother product to use for your team or for you. But actually the other part of it is what it says about your practice. Because I think if I was a patient and I was going to an orthodontic practice or whatever, and they were saying, yeah, we do a virtual consultation, I think kind of cool. And they go, just jump on Zoom. I might feel a bit weird about it. Not because I don't like Zoom or don't think Zoom is safe, but it doesn't necessarily convey what you might want to convey about your brand and your practice as being slick and well put together and considered. It feels like you've just taken something which is off the shelf and just made that work. On top of that, you've got that link into all the other kind of things that dental monitoring are now kind of doing really well, which are really interesting, which may be of interest to you and may actually be of benefit to your patients as well. And I suppose the only other thing I would add is that again, when I've chatted in the past, I suppose, about some of these things, I'm very conscious that everybody's practice is different. And I suppose what I don't want to do as we chat over the next kind of 45 minutes or so is give the impression that in my particular practice, and I have 5 practices, one of which is fairly big, the others are fairly small. But I don't want to give the impression that we're doing anything particularly special or that doesn't work in a smaller or a bigger practice. And the principles of that patient journey are applicable whatever your setting, whether you're single-handed or whether you've got 15 therapists in a warehouse. You know, there's value in it, whatever your setting. Does that answer the question?
Sure, that's a beautiful answer. Now that takes me actually to the next question. To what degree do you trust this technology? And more specifically, you know, when we talk about AI, this is what makes people more skeptical, I would say, right? So, you know, what is your experience with that?
So trust is an interesting one, isn't it? So just some people may not know what SmileMate actually does, dare I say, and some of the advantages of that. Because one of the unique bit about SmileMate, over and above the fact that it joins in all these things together, is it uses the AI engine to drive a report for your patient, which is going to describe some of their key clinical features, but it's going to use the AI to identify those. And it does that within around about 5 to 10 to 15 minutes of those photographs being submitted. And it will then generate a set of report options that you can then include in a bespoke fashion in an email template to send out to your patients in whichever way you choose to do that. And you can customize that and do whatever you want to do. So do I trust it? Well, of course I trust it, but I'm not reliant on it. And I think that's the difference, because I think the smart place for any clinician these days to position themselves is in the gaps between the technology, because the technology is making your previous work, it's eroding some of that. You don't need to do that because it can be automated, but your role becomes even more important when it's important. So in other words, you become like the coal that's crushed to become the diamond in all of this. So do I trust it? Yes, I trust it, but I don't rely on it, because I'm always going to have the ability to go in there and check it and verify it and add that little extra bit of something, that little extra bit of humanity or nuance that's going to make sure that you are delivering value to your patients as part of that process, so that it's not diminishing the role of the orthodontist. It's making the effort that the orthodontist puts into the process more valued and more specific and more efficient. So you're not spending hours and hours doing all the basic stuff, like, for example, counting the teeth and commenting on plaque. You're dealing with the nuance of the treatment plan or what the treatment plan might be. So I think trust is a term that might be used by people that simply don't want to accept the fact that it's there and it's not going away. Because you've got there's no reason not to trust AI, because when we look at all the data, when you look at some of the radiology studies, when you look at the ability of some of the AI-driven engines to pick up on things like early breast malignancies in screening, you know, it has been proven to be far more accurate than the human eye. And that's about, dare I say it, complacency about our abilities, frankly. The computers can do quite a lot of what we do better, but there's still quite a lot of what we do that will remain completely unique. And our job is to identify and find that and to promote that and talk about that.
That's really beautiful what you just said, Guy. And this is reminding me actually of, you know, they asked Jan LeCun, who is the godfather of AI. He's the one who invented the AI that they use today in the world of radiology. And it is the specialty that is most affected by it today, because it's so, you know, it's very, very accurate. And so they asked him, do you think that this technology will replace humans? And he said, the only way not to be replaced by this technology is to allow yourself to be replaced by it, but not replaced by it, but, you know, to be an ally, to be an ally with it, right? So the thing is not AI versus human, but it's right. A human plus AI is better than a human and, you know, AI alone.
It's a complicated one, and I can understand why it feels threatening, but only in the same way that orthodontic therapists felt like a threat to orthodontic specialists. But to a greater or lesser part, there aren't any specialists that are still out there, you know, not working. They may not be working quite the same way they were, But, you know, look at COVID. I mean, the number of jobs that are simply not going to exist after COVID, the number of people, God bless them, who've been working in retail, who are now going to, you know, going to have to find work in sectors that don't even exist yet. My son is 11, and we were chatting about careers in a rare moment of insight from an 11-year-old boy. He was saying that, you know, most of the jobs that me and my friends will be doing haven't been invented, which is, for an old man, terrifying, but incredibly exciting. And it's a reason for hope. Because if we're reliant on just the things that we know, where it takes us nowhere. You know, if you cast your mind back to, you know, when I was in the 90s or the 80s or whatever it might be, and you said in your pocket, you're going to have this device, which is, you know, 10 centimeters by 5 centimeters or whatever, that's going to take photographs, it's going to do this, and it's 10 times more powerful than the rocket that went to the moon, you'd go, get out of here. Not only do I not believe you, I don't want that. And look at us now. And it's a funny old thing. It's a funny old thing. But the secret is to surf the wave and not let yourself either ignore it or be drowned by it. You don't necessarily need to be riding the first wave, but you certainly need to recognize that there are waves and they ain't going to stop just as sure as the tide comes in.
Definitely. Now, I want to go back to the practical side. So we talked about, you know, why not Zoom or why not any video call platform? And then we talked about the importance of AI and how it helps you, you know, screen, for example, the images for quality and arrange everything and do all the little stuff that you don't want to waste your time doing it. And I know that at the beginning of the pandemic, you use another platform, right, for virtual consultation. So you've been able to try different platforms, and then you settle on SmileMate. Yeah. And this is what I want to ask you. Why is that? So let's suppose today I am a patient who's doing a virtual consultation. What is the big advantage of using SmileMate versus another platform?
So I think, so the virtual consultation piece, so we use SmileMate as our way to manage our patients before we have had either a virtual consultation or a physical consultation. So what we've realized is that it is a very clean and a very friction-free funnel. Now that sounds like marketing nonsense, but what in effect it is how do you open your arms and open your doors to make it as easy as possible for patients to access your services? And how do you make it as easy as possible to find out exactly what you need about those patients? And that includes that demographic data. Who are you? What's your name, data, all that boring stuff. But then you get some incredibly valuable clinical data at the very first step, which allows you then to inform what you do next, or how you manage that patient next, or what information you give to that patient next. So it's a really powerful screening and triaging tool in any form of dental care to allow you to, I suppose, move the value upstream. Because in a traditional model, you would have, you know, a patient would contact you, be referred, call you up on the phone, fill in a form on the website, whatever it might be. They'd sit in a pile, they'd sit in an email inbox. You'd then at some point somebody gets to that, they might be phone them or they might do whatever. And then you maybe would invite them in for a consultation in a week or 2 or 3 or whatever it might be. Or they'd have to take time off work and get somebody to look after the kids. And you're putting all of these barriers up. And then it's 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks before you've even seen them. Then they come into your practice and you've kept them waiting. And then you tell them they're not even suitable because they've got gum disease or, you know, they've got perfectly straight teeth and just need a new retainer, whatever it might be. With the SmileMate process, because we get a set of photographs, or I concede of sometimes variable quality, but a set of photographs usually of acceptable quality to allow you to do what you need to do, because this is not a full clinical assessment, it's a triaging set of photographs. You can then give patients a huge amount of information and a huge amount of bespoke advice far earlier in that patient journey when the idea is still fresh in their mind. And that is the game changer. And that's what SmileMate does, which is unique for us, because it's not about the time that you spend on a virtual call. It's about how do we move the value of our organization and our experience and our skills and expertise further up that timeline so that it's closer to that point of initial contact. So when that little pilot light in the patient's head goes off, whether that's NHS or private, because we use it for both, to say, I'm interested in orthodontic, we can nurture that flame faster and more effectively. Because if we let it go too long, the flame will go out. if we blow too hard on the flame, it will go out. Or if we don't give it the right kind of fuel, it will go out. So SmileMate allows us to nurture that flame in a timely and more way than we can with the traditional models or some of the alternatives because of that early doors photo acquisition. Patients think it's fantastic. They get so much value back for nothing. A few photographs on your phone. It's great.
So are you claiming that in a way, this simple tool allows you to generate more leads, right? Or not generate more leads, but to tap into a wider audience that you wouldn't if you're using only synchronous mode of teledentistry, because this has both synchronous and asynchronous mode of teledentistry.
I think that's fair to say, but I'm going to flip it around actually, because if you look at it, I don't necessarily think SmileMate in and of itself generates more leads. Okay. Not, it might do. It depends how you market it. I mean, that's a separate conversation about how you do with that. And, you know, but in the old model, you had a cohort of patients, whether it was 5, 10, 500 or whatever, who at some point were saying, I'm interested in what you do. And they would make some kind of effort to contact you, whether that was picking up the phone, filling in a web form, whatever. But then what happened was, from that lead, there is a massive, massive rate of attrition. Because what's happened is that patient's just given up. You haven't given them what they needed early enough or in a way that they wanted it soon enough to allow them to progress their thoughts and their thinking on. So the attrition of people who just moved on to the next thing, they thought, they didn't get back to me, the boiler's blown up now, I'm not interested, or the kids are back at school, or I'm back to work, or whatever. So what it's done is it's allowed us to speak to the patients faster and sooner so that we can make sure that the patients that were interested stay interested for long enough for us to give them some truth, to give them some real information about their situation, to allow them to make a more informed decision other than saying, they never got in touch with me, stuff it, which is what a lot of patients do. Now, the other part of this is that there's a lot of people out there that talk in terms of bad leads. Say, people that come through Facebook, they're bad leads. They never convert. Or people that come through whatever advertising, they're bad leads. I mean, I just have such an issue with that because first of all, I don't believe it. And secondly, I think it's probably a little bit offensive, dare I say, because it's not, they've genuinely said, hand on heart, I'm interested in what you're doing. And then you're saying, I think you're a bad lead because you don't fit my existing process. So it's not a bad lead. It's a bad process, or it's a process that lacks empathy for the type of leads that are now seeking out the type of care that you can offer. So what we're now doing with the whole virtual process is we're evolving to make sure that we have a system that is empathetic and supportive of the type of patients that are now reaching out to us who are interested in what we can do. And we're moving all of that upstream so that we can do that faster and quicker and closer to the point of initial contact before the flame goes out.
Definitely. So for some, it might still not be, 100% clear of how the process goes. So let's put it to the test right now. My name is Ryan. I'm looking to do, I'm looking to have a beautiful smile. So I'm looking at an orthodontist next to me that does, clear aligner treatments. I go to the internet and I type, invisible braces or something that a patient would type in. Can you describe this early part of the journey and how you are able to catch them very, very quickly and, like you said, increase the conversion rate because you're giving them perceived value at this early stage of the journey?
So there's lots of different ways people can access you, but they all end up in one place, and that is on the SmileMate form. So all of our patients get directed to the SmileMate form, whether they phone up, whether they come via a Facebook paid advert, whether they come via our website. All of our patient inquiries go to the same place. And what that means is that if they land on a sponsored ad, it'll say words to the effects of free virtual consultation, click to find out more, or blah, 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 blah. If they land on our website, there is a banner and a call to action and a pop-up that says free virtual consultation. And then we direct them to the SmileMate form and we say, all you need to do is to fill in the simple form and send us some photographs, and here's how. They then obviously fill in the form, they get the photographs, that comes through onto the SmileMate backend that our team then process. Every day, there is effectively an on-call orthodontist who will then review all of those SmileMates. They will review the photographs, they'll look at the photographs, and they will then provide comments back to the treatment coordinators. That will then inform the report that gets sent out within 24 hours, which is a report saying, here is your report with some information about your oral condition. To find out more about the treatments that might be suitable, click here to book a free of charge virtual consultation with one of our treatment coordinators to talk about the treatment options. And that's it. And then there is an online booking form that they go through to, and that then allows them to book a virtual free of charge consultation with one of the treatment coordinators, not for a diagnostic and treatment planning visit. This is really important. It is for a case discussion about the options in general. Because let's make it very, very clear, you cannot treatment plan a patient until you put your fingers in their mouth. So that is the next step. But what it does is it means we get enough information, and the orthodontist can provide enough information or enough salient questions for the treatment coordinators to give the patient, to allow them to make the decision about whether they are in or whether they are out. So that then when they choose to come in to start the treatment, they're not coming in speculatively into the building. They are coming in to start their treatment, probe the gums, take the x-rays, confirm the treatment plan, meet the orthodontist, do the paperwork, one visit, let's go. And that's the process, dead simple. And what we've done is we've taken away all of the front end faff with a big pile of inquiries that needs to be dealt with. Some telephone, some email, some web form, some dentist. We've taken away all of that new patient in practice noise, the patients that don't turn up, the patients that sit there looking miserable because you've kept them waiting. They don't really know why they're there because they were never really interested. The patients that feel like you're trying to sell to them. The patients that are scared of coming into the dental environment because they're scared. And you've taken all of that and you've given them really high quality feedback earlier on, and in a manner which is not threatening or intimidating and is on their terms. And that's really magic, and it's really empathetic, and it's hugely efficient in the practice that we've saved ourselves hours and hours and hours of work a week in terms of face-to-face new patient consultations. We now have treatment coordinators that work from home instead of in the practice, which frees up space. So we are now more COVID secure. In a sense, we've got more ability to move, isolate people. And we've got treatment coordinators that are then able to work more flexibly. So the benefits kind of roll on and on and on. And the thing that I really didn't realize was that patients don't want to come to the dentist. They just don't want to be there. And some of them are scared, and some of them are very closed and intimidated by that environment when you kind of swan in and it smells a bit weird and you're Dr. So-and-so or whatever. And actually having a conversation with them like this, when they're sitting at their kitchen table or by the fireside, they're much more open and they listen better. So they're much more tuned in to what you're actually saying. And the doors aren't banging and the nurses are not coming in and out. And there's none of that fuss. There's none of that noise. It's just you or the treatment coordinator and them having a conversation that's real and relevant and without disruption. And that's magic. And we underestimated that. In fact, we didn't even think it would be a bonus, but it really is.
That is beautiful. Now I want to go a few steps back and ask you, go back to two main points. The first one, we talked about leads. You said, there's no bad lead. But through this process, are you kind of doing, what we call eliminating the waste? So you are eliminating the shoppers and only booking in patients that are ready to be committed to the treatment. That's one.
Yep.
And the second point is, I want to talk about the TC. You said something very interesting. You said you send comments to the TC through this the platform, and then she will do the video consultation with them, right? So in a way, did you inverse the role of the TC? Because usually when the TC is doing this live with the patient, she doesn't have all the answers.
That's right.
But now, when she goes in and do that initial consultation, she has all the clinical answers to the patient.
I wouldn't go as far as to say all the clinical answers.
But answers that she wouldn't have before.
Is the knowledge as to what kind of options might be appropriate, the knowledge around roughly how long treatment might take, the knowledge around whether extractions might be required, the knowledge around whether some form of dental treatment might be needed before or afterwards. So what we've given them is the touch points, the conversation points for that discussion. Because I use the phrase consultation, which is probably incorrect. I would call it more of a discussion. And that's what it is. And it's without commitment. And the treatment coordinators are very clear. And what they will say is, Dr. So-and-so has reviewed your photographs. With great pleasure, I'm able to have a conversation with you to give you some information and some prices to see if this is something you then want to progress.
And do you feel that this affects the conversion rate compared to the traditional way that a TC would conduct this initial consultation?
Well, let me come back to that, because I just want to go back to another point about your idea of waste, which is I guess a term I'm not hugely comfortable with, but I know what you mean. And the reality is, most people, we're able to say, you will benefit from treatment of some sort. Because the website is orthodontics and people kind of get that, and people are pretty smart these days. But if we see a set of photographs and it's clearly somebody with beautiful straight teeth, we'll send a comment back saying, find out what this person really wants. Because it may be that they've just done it in error or there's something else going on. If we see somebody that's got a mouthful of decay, we'll send a message back to the treatment coordinator saying, reach out to this person and say, they need to visit with their dentist, or we need to book them in with one of our dentists because we have a sister dental practice to get them stable, and then we can chat. If we get somebody who's already got braces on, again, we can give them a very specific set of information to allow them to kind of guide them to the next step, which is about what are the rules of the game for accepting a transfer. But to the point about leads, and this is the other magic bit, that if you go back to the traditional model, you get a lead, it sits on the desk, they may or may not come in for a new patient consultation, and they may or may not go ahead. So traditionally, around about 50% of our leads would never book a consultation because it just didn't work for them. We didn't get in touch with them fast enough, we couldn't get a time that worked, or they just went off the idea. So we lost 50% roughly straight away. And then our conversion rate from new patient consultation was around 55%. So in broad terms, for every lead that we got at the very top end, we stood around about, let's say, a 25 to 30% chance of that patient having treatment. Okay, so a 1 in 4 chance. The data that we're now seeing with the new model is that there is now, get this, between a 4 in 10 and 50%, so between a 40 and 50% chance. So of them starting treatment. So we've seen the numbers almost double in terms of the conversions from those original leads. Now, I absolutely admit there is a huge confounder in there, which is the lockdown effect, in that having your teeth straightened is pretty much the only thing you can do at the moment. But even once you discount that from those figures, there is a significant positive bump by moving the added value as close as you can to that point of initial contact and reducing the amount of friction before that patient experiences what you can do for them in the form of a SmileMate report, in the form of a virtual consultation with one of the treatment coordinators at a time that suits them. It's really impressive. And you can do it with other systems. You could do something similar with Zoom, but why make your life difficult? It's so much easier. And the report may not mean much to you, but we all want to read about ourselves. We're all a little bit narcissistic. And if somebody sends you something, a bit like 23andMe, the genetic screening kind of company, we're all a little bit, I wonder what I'm like. I wonder what makes me me. And people love a bit of that. So the idea of giving them their little report, which is just for them, and they can say, oh, look at that. Oh, isn't that interesting? It's fantastic. It's not exciting to us, but it's not about us. To them, it's unique. And it builds that little bit of, value. Fantastic.
I couldn't agree more. And if you want to go actually one step further, you can try DNA Fit. It actually tells you what's good for you and for your health.
I'm too scared. I'm just going to find out I'm 100% from Birmingham.
No, Guy, I'm going to give you just 30 seconds if you want to have a refill.
I'm good.
And I'm going to share my screen. If the audience, are curious enough to try SmileMate, we have a special offer right now. And just let me share my screen so you can have the QR code. Here you go. Just take a few seconds to scan it here. And I will share it at the end of the presentation as well. You know what? You have 28 days, SmileMate free trial. Why not?
I think it's one of these things. And I think one of the things I would say, and this is, listen, we're talking about SmileMate and we're talking about that virtual patient journey this evening. But whatever you do in your practice, one of the things that I guess I've realized is it's very difficult to dip your toe in the water and do a little bit. So you can't say, well, I'm going to use SmileMate for every 10th patient. You can't say, I'm going to maybe try Invisalign for, every 15th patient that might be suitable. If you're going to do something, and if you're going to start to build your practice around this and really start to change the way you do things, whether you're a tiny practice or a huge practice, it doesn't matter. My really strong advice is you just commit. And it can be a little bit scary because it's a bit like the high diving board thing, isn't it? But it's so worth it because you find out faster whether it's for you or not, because you might hate it. No, I don't think you will, but you might. But isn't it better that you find out quicker by getting all in, getting all your patients to go through that, testing it, finding out how it works, changing it, testing it, changing it, testing it, getting your team on board? Because if you don't do that and you dip your toe and you fiddle and do a little bit here, a little bit there, you'll never get the team on board, because actually a lot of this is going to be driven by the team, because the back office administration of this, the treatment coordinators, they need to get it. They need to be on board with it, and they need to want to make it work for you. And that's about commitment and showing that committed, consistent approach to these kind of bits of change, which are coming along thick and fast at the moment. But as orthodontists, we don't always like that, I guess. We sometimes like to try it a little bit and see how it goes and try, but just do it. Just give it a shot, whatever it might be.
Now, you touched here on a very sensitive point. The team is here key for the success. So some might find it challenging. Some might be afraid of that change. How do you see that, the staff adapting to this new way of doing things?
So I think managing change is the problem that we deal with. We don't always realize it, but how we as leaders and practice owners or associates or any clinician manage change is the problem of the day. And even in terms of marketing, a lot of change management and marketing have got lots of things in common in terms of touch points and nudges and consistency. And I suppose we've all struggled with this, in that we've said been on a course. So, I don't know, you go on a course on a Saturday, you turn up on the Monday morning and you go, right, we're going to try this week. And then you stick it to the back of the kitchen door and then you run away and everybody goes, what the hell was that? And it doesn't work. It doesn't stick. And to get the team on board with anything, SmileMate, whatever it might be, takes time, and it takes a bit of effort to help them recognize what the benefits are for them. And those benefits might be unexpected, and they might be multiple, and they might not be much, because it might not take much, because people want different things out of their job. And it might be that it just makes their lives a bit easier. It might be that they get to work with some technology that's really cool. It might be that their bonus relates to how many consultations they do or how effective they are. It might be that they feel like their jobs are more secure because they're working with a practice that is engaging with technologies that feel more future-proofed. But whatever to quote Simon Sinek, you've got to find their why. Because once you've got that, you can work with them to support molding the change to fit their why. And that might involve giving them some training. It might involve giving them some physical space. It might involve buying them a new laptop. It might involve you relinquishing the reins to allow them to take control of that, because their why might be, I want a project. I want something that I can make my own. So giving somebody in your team, I want you, Johnny, to make our practice virtual consultations. I will support you. I'll give you the space. I'll give you the computer. I'll give you the time. Go make it happen. How long do you think you need? Fantastic. That's you. But that's the secret, is to find out what's going to make your team tick to make them want to get on board with it. And you're going to need to help them through that. And it might be easy, it might happen quickly, or it might take much longer. The second mistake we make when bringing the team on board is that consistency thing, is that we don't stick at it, or we do a few patients here and a few patients there, because it just makes you look, dare I say it, a bit weak and a bit unsure of yourself. And that's really disconcerting for a team member. They kind of want you as a leader to be, you're allowed to be vulnerable and you're allowed to be wrong. But that idea of being a bit unsure or a bit uncertain about the decisions, I think is quite disconcerting. You're allowed to say, this is what we're going to do. I might be wrong, but we're going to try it for 6 weeks. And then these are the criteria that we're going to judge it by. And we're all going to have an opportunity to contribute to the assessment of success or failure. And then we'll decide. And if it's a rubbish idea, I'll hold my hands up and we'll do something else. That's not weakness. That's openness. Weakness is saying, well, we can try it a little bit. And, you know, my next door neighbor might want to do it. That's weak. That doesn't work, because then it's like, well, this is just nonsense. So, and then the final piece, again, is to remove all of that friction. Make it easy for people to do it. Make it easier for people to do the thing that you're trying to change than to do it the old way. So, for example, if you don't want people to print stuff out anymore, get rid of your printers. If you want to go paper-free, stop buying ink cartridges, which is what we're doing at the moment. We're not buying any more ink cartridges for the printers, because we wanted to go paper-free about a year ago, and we still seem to be printing everything. So now we're just not going to buy anymore and see what happens. We're going to make it easier to do it the right way than the wrong way.
Awesome. If you want to change, you cannot change the mindset, but you can change the behavior, right? By changing these little things. So the next question I want to ask you, as the vaccine game, because so far we've been talking about the pandemic, and obviously, virtual consultation is adventurous and in the nature of a pandemic. But since the vaccination game is going strong right now, and, the pandemic will be over soon, or at least, we'll be back to whatever the new normal is. Do you think patient will prefer going back to see the dentist in person and skip these virtual consultation, or do you think this
got nothing to do with it?
Will stay in the long term?
Got nothing to do with it. I think it's accelerated the change, and that's a bit of a hackneyed cliche in pandemic terms, but it's true. And the writing was on the wall. I mean, we can now do all of our banking on our phones, right? We don't pine for the days that we could go back into the bank and have to queue up with a checkbook. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the invention of the internet and the invention of the smartphone spelled the end of high street banking for the most part. And it's going to be the same with this. There will always be a cohort of, okay, so it's a bit like making suits. So back in the day, every reasonable sized town would have a tailor, maybe more than one. And certainly if you're in a big city, you'd have multiple tailors. And that's where you would go to get your suits made. You might have one suit, or you might have 50 suits, depending on how prosperous or wealthy you were. In Newcastle, where I live, there is now one tailor that just about makes a go of it, because they keep making hunting jackets for the landed gentry of Northumberland. But the point is, at some point, Burton's came along, which you may not know and may not mean anything to you in France, but Burton's came along and they started to make suits of a reasonable quality available to people on the high street off the peg. And it changed forever. But there remains a small group of people that want a bespoke suit, and a bespoke suit is a lovely thing, but it is A, inconvenient, it is B, expensive, and it is C, absolutely categorically not for everybody. And it's kind of the same with orthodontics. There will always be a small number of practices and I think a small number of patients that will demand and insist and benefit from a very high level, very time consuming consultation face-to-face over hours with full 38-page reports, that's fine, because that's what they feel they need. But the vast volume of patients in the middle of the normal distribution bell curve will be very accepting, and I would argue prefer to do things in the new way. And then there is the tail end of the bell curve who are going to go and see direct-to-consumer aligner companies, and they are welcome to it. But the big old chunk in the middle is absolutely ready for something which is designed around the needs of the modern consumer, not necessarily the modern patient, because they're different. Because until you've got your fingers in their mouth, they are a consumer. And we would do well to remember that in terms of how we present our services, because we need to present them as if we are presenting them to consumers, because that's the reality. Are you there? Are you back?
I'm there. I'm always there, just listening to your beautiful talk. So you touch on another very sensitive point here. You said, patients, they play by the same rules as consumers, right? Like any consumer that is buying anything from a store. But we haven't talked about the NHS patients. And so what I want to ask you is, how do you incorporate your private patients with your NHS ones? So do you have different sessions or allocated times?
The different thing is, because of the way the contracts work and because of the way we need to look after the NHS patients. So we have the same system. They send some photographs in. We don't send them the same set of emails. And the orthodontists run the virtual consultations. So they're not treatment discussions with a treatment coordinator. They are orthodontist-led virtual consultations. But we treat them, again, as triaging visits, because what we want to do is identify those patients that are an absolute open goal, green light, ready to go. And then they go into the treatment waiting list, or they come into the practice to start their treatment. We want to identify those that are not suitable because they're too mild, because they're not dentally developed, because they haven't got a toothbrush, and then we can discharge them without having to bring them into the practice. We want to then identify that small group, and it is a small group. We reckon only about 1 in every 10 who need to come into the practice to confirm something. Now, that might be that we need to take an X-ray. It might be that in UK terms, we need to confirm what the IOTN might be in terms of whether they're eligible for NHS. And then there's a subgroup, the fourth group, who are those people that maybe want to access our services privately. And then we can take them out of that and then put them into our private practice by saying, these are the options, you're eligible, what do you want to do? This is the waiting list, all that kind of stuff, which is going to be very dependent on your particular practice and your particular situation. Interestingly, it's just been accepted for publication, which I'm super excited about. We've just done a little kind of service review of this, and we reviewed 100 patients, and it sounds like an advert for washing powder, but 98 out of 100 NHS patients preferred the virtual consultations to the face-to-face, and they would recommend it. They would prefer to do that again next time, which was amazing. 98 out of 100. And the next thing we're going to start to look at is the equity of access, because one of the things in our part of the world is that there's a huge amount of socioeconomic deprivation. And I'm doing a little bit of work with the local dentists in public health to see whether virtual consultations allow or encourage people from different socioeconomic groups, i.e. the more deprived ones, to access your care, because they don't, if they haven't got a car, if they can't afford the bus, whatever it might be, can this actually level the playing field so that more people can access NHS services? Because everybody's got a smartphone of some sort now, but they don't necessarily have access to transport. They don't necessarily have the family support. What if mum or dad are on 0 hours contracts, etc.? So we're really interested in the idea of equity and whether virtual consultations are more equitable rather. Does that make sense? It's a really interesting idea. And I like it.
Beautifully said, Guy. We actually have someone who asked, what do you think of this being used in a hospital? When the aim is not to generate patient, but to triage for suitability for care.
It's perfect, right? Because halfway through every virtual consultation, you can just lose connection, and that solves your problem. Listen, it works. I mean, the hospitals are there to provide a service in the way that the NHS primary care practices are. But I think what we've realised through COVID is that every face-to-face contact has to mean something. It has to be of value. So you don't necessarily go to the supermarket just to buy a pack of basil. You'd put that on the shopping list and go once and get everything, because we're now kind of indoctrinated into this idea that we want to reduce some level of social contact. And I don't know how long that will go on, but it certainly applies to bringing people into clinical environments, particularly into secondary care, because they've got a whole different set of challenges because they tend to be much more COVID hotspots. And I don't think that's going to go away, because not least of all, because it's quite efficient to make sure that if somebody's coming into the building, it's not just to tell them they're not suitable for treatment. Because to bring somebody into the building, particularly in secondary care, where God love my secondary care colleagues and all due respect to them, the clinics tend to take up more of the day for a patient than they might do to pop into a primary care practice for the most part, because that's the nature of it. But if we can reduce the stress on those services by doing virtual consultations to only bring those people in that need to come in, or to say you're suitable for primary care, I'll refer you, or you need to go away for 2 years, or whatever it might be, it's amazing. Because if your job is to triage the patients, or if your job is to identify those patients that might be suitable for teaching clinics, I can't think of many better ways of doing it, frankly, because you don't even need to use your clinical space. You could set aside an office space with, your consultant orthodontist or registrars or whatever it might be. You could set it up in a webinar format so that with the appropriate consents, you could actually do that as a teaching exercise. I mean, it really is a really interesting idea. The challenge is, of course, all the IT and GDPR issues around the way IT departments work in secondary care. But don't see those as insurmountable obstacles, because the benefits, SmileMate or no SmileMate, of doing virtual consultations are huge. But I think, in fairness, most secondary care units now recognise this. But for me, SmileMate would be a really effective way of managing some of that workflow potentially.
So that takes me back to your point early on in the session. There is no bad leads, but there is some that are not suitable, right? So
not suitable or a bad process.
Or a bad process. So what is it? What do you call this process? Qualifying before booking, something like that?
I think the process is having, it's on my way or the highway. If your face is, it's a bit like going to the nightclub, whereas if you're wearing trainers, you don't get in. But that doesn't mean you're not an amazing dancer and won't have a good time. Just because you're not presenting yourself in a way that suits the way your practice workflow works, doesn't mean you're a bad patient or won't be a really amazing patient.
You're not ready yet. Save for some nice shoes.
I genuinely don't get it. And I think it's one of the things, I've never had the good fortune to buy a Lamborghini. I'm not really into cars, but my son quite likes a Lamborghini. And he was saying, because we talk a lot about status and staying kind of modest and humble and all these kinds of things. And he talks about if you go into a Lamborghini dealership, they treat everybody the same, because you can just never tell who's going to open up their wallet and pay for it. Whereas if you go into one of the German manufacturers, they might treat you in a very snooty way. And I think that's kind of the same thing, is that if you treat everybody as if they might be a great patient, then a significant portion of them will turn out to be a really great patient. Because a lot of patients are a bit intimidated and they're a bit nervous and they're a bit scared. They might even be embarrassed. And if your system or your process is set up to not recognize that and not be nurturing of their priorities and supportive of their anxieties, then you're going to lose them. They're going to feel ostracized by you. But we shouldn't forget that all of those feelings are very real to those patients. The fear, the anxiety, the embarrassment. Just remember to be empathetic, and you can't go too far wrong. And your team need to know that too.
So talking about the process, Guy, we've got an interesting question from Dr. Griffin. We found that the virtual consultation conversion rate is much lower. Any thoughts? And the second question that we got, that maybe this is related to that question as well, not directly, but in some way, some people still did not understand what the screening report is and how it can help you in the sales process.
So let me deal with the screening report first. So with the screening report, what effectively, and you need, why don't you sign up for a 28-day free trial and find out?
Exactly.
Yeah. But what in effect happens is that you set up in the SmileMate backend, you can set up a whole series of clinical situations, whether that's crowding or, lots of dental stuff. So, decay or inflamed gums or spacing or deep bite or overjet, all sorts of different things. And you can set the system up so that when it identifies one of those features, it will present a series of treatment options. And then you can which you can make completely bespoke. So you can describe those treatment options in your own terms. So you can say, here at, Dunkirk Orthodontics, we do this for Invisalign, whatever. And you can completely bespoke it. You can put images in there, and then you can automate those elements, building a report that gets sent out to the patient. And the report will say, dear Jemima, thank you, blah, 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 blah. Here is your report. We have found that you have got missing teeth, crowding, inflamed gums, and, some discoloration. We would, at this stage, recommend that you consider the following treatment options. We would like to invite you to a virtual consultation or a face-to-face visit, whatever you want to do to discuss this further. Or you can say, we would recommend treatment. These are the costs. Tell us if you want to go ahead. So you've got all the flexibility in the world to make a automated email responder to suit your patient journey as you want to design it. And you can change it and you can evolve it and you can take feedback on that. But what it does is it means that you don't need to do all the heavy lifting of describing it all and writing it all down each time, because it's all there in modules, just a tick box in, tick box out, tick box in, tick box out, whatever you want to do. And it's really cool and it's really neat and it's really easy. And what it means is that patient receives that report, which is all about them and all about their options. And you can be as black and white about it as you want, or you can keep it quite vague. You can give them all the information about costs and next steps, or you can pull back some of that information to encourage them to come onto a virtual consultation with you or to book an appointment. Because you can ebb and flow with that information in terms of how confident you feel or in terms of how you want to manage that patient journey. Because we don't give them things like pricing information or any of that kind of stuff until they're on that virtual call. We give them the next part of the information and then invite them to the next step. And all the time, keep them moving on. In terms of the conversion rates, that's not been our experience. So our experience is the conversion rate at virtual consultation is the same, if not slightly better than it was at face-to-face. So that's between 50 and 60%. So 50 to 60% of people on virtual calls book a face-to-face visit to start their treatment. And we take a deposit during that virtual call. So we will have a credit card machine and they'll take the credit card details and they'll take a £50 deposit to secure that face-to-face visit. And I think that's really important, and I would strongly recommend that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there's no objections from patients. They're perfectly happy to do that because they've had so much value from you up to that point without any obligation or commitment. And the second reason is I can't remember the last time somebody didn't turn up. I can't remember. If they cancel with more than 24 hours notice, we give them the 50 quid back. So I don't know what you're doing in your virtual consultations, but my advice would be stop, take a step back and try something different. Just revisit what you're actually doing and how you're doing it. Revisit what the call to action is. In other words, what is the close at the end of that conversation? You don't have to be salesy. You just have to say, how are you feeling about this? Can we book your next appointment? We've got lots of availability a week on Tuesday. It'll be really fantastic to get you into the practice, to get you started. We're getting really busy. And don't make it difficult for them to go ahead. Make it easy for them to go ahead. Whereas if you close the virtual consultation with, we'll send you an email and get in touch, there's no chance. Because firstly, people are busy. And secondly, what that says to people is you don't really care that much. It's not being salesy to say, let's do this. It's not being pushy to say, we think you'd do really well. I think this would be great for you. If you're ready, let's book your appointment for the next stage. It's actually worse to be too cool, to be too kind of standoffish at the back end by saying, oh, you just let us know if you want to go ahead. Because what it does is it says, we don't really care if you go ahead or not. We don't really care about you. We don't really care that this is clearly a really big deal and that you might just need your hand holding for that last little step with somebody saying, it's okay to do this. It's okay. Because they may feel like, I can't do this. It's too much money. Or I can't do this. I'm not deserving of this. Put yourself in the patient's shoes. Really powerful to invite them to the next step rather than leave it in their court. All the time, keep the control.
Very well said, Guy. And you have a message from Dr. Griffin saying, thanks for the info, seems very valuable, and he will try to implement it.
Never be afraid to change your mind. Never be afraid to stop, refresh, and start again. You know, failing fast. Just do it, fail, do it again, fail, do it again. And eventually you'll find something that really starts to stick. And that's just, you know, Silicon Valley talk, really, isn't it? You know,
MVP.
There you go. Just get started. You know, you're not going to do anybody any harm by changing your virtual consultation process. You're not changing your whole clinical philosophy. It's not the same.
You're listening to too many Scott Galloway podcasts.
Yeah, too many podcasts. That's my problem now.
So let's see if we have any question from the audience. All right. So from Dr. Andron, what system do you use to book online virtual consultations? Always feel very nervous about someone taking over the appointment book.
So we use Calendly. So we have the treatment coordinators run their virtual consultations on Calendly. There are lots of other ones, but it's really good. You can set it up how you want to set it up, and it means that they book online and they get all the automatic text reminders and email reminders, and you can set it all up according to how you want to set it up. There's a bit of fiddle and there's a bit of faff with it, but because our treatment coordinators are not occupying space in the practice, we don't put them onto our practice system for the appointments. They're on the practice system for notes and all that kind of stuff, but their appointment scheduling is run via Calendly, because God love the dental software suppliers, but their online bookings are they're just not right yet. They're just not there. Whereas things like Calendly are great because they're so flexible and there's so much functionality there if you want to, and it's really cheap. You know, it might even be free to start with. And we pay a little bit, but it might be 10, 15, 20 quid a month, but it's really good. It's really good. And they get iCal reminders and all that kind of stuff, all that really cool stuff, which makes it look like your practice is really sorted and really slick. And it doesn't matter if you're not. Fake it till you make it.
So, Guy, conscious of the time and knowing that you have to wake up very early tomorrow for your morning jog, I will ask you one last simple question. We have a lot of associates these days that are very interested in this product. However, they're afraid because it's a different structure. They have to get the buy-in from the principal. So, you know, it's a different process. What is your advice?
Okay.
I know it's not your area of expertise.
Well, I've been an associate for a long time as well. So
you always have something wise to say. So I say, you know what, let's try it.
So I'd say a couple of things. The first thing is, as an associate, think about how you could develop a model that you could pilot. So could you say to the practice owner, I would like to do this. I'm even prepared, dare I say it, to pay for it initially, because I want to see how it works. And if it works, will you consider adopting it for the whole practice? And if they say no, and if you as a associate feel a bit hard done by, then I would look for a new job. Because if the sort of practice that you're working for can't see the value in these types of technologies and can't see that the world is closing in with direct-to-consumer aligners, with practices that are doing this, with competition for patients' time and effort and energy and financial resource. If they don't recognize those threats, then they are, by being passive, becoming incredibly vulnerable. And hence your job and your position and your security is going to become incredibly vulnerable. So if they can't recognize that, then my suggestion would be you either set up on your own or seek employment with an organization that does recognize the value from a patient perspective. And that's the only perspective that really matters, of starting to develop some of these workflows and leverage some of these technologies to make everybody's lives just a little bit better. And if anybody wants to come and work for me, they'd be more than welcome, because I am currently seeking somebody.
Are you looking to recruit?
Yeah, we are looking to recruit.
All right. So if you have any associates in here,
just putting that out there. Sorry to all my friends who are principals. So there it is. So that's what I would suggest. Yeah, but you have to be proactive. And I think, particularly in the dental world, actually, there's lots of dental associates that are really, really on it and really enthusiastic about developing these kinds of things and building their practices and developing their profiles and trying this kind of stuff out. I haven't seen so much of that in orthodontics. I wonder if that's just because the way we were trained is that we've been through these organizations where we're slightly kind of broken and then we have to be rebuilt. Whereas actually we need to maybe be a little bit more confident about saying, you know what, I think there may be a better way, and seizing that and being a bit more quick about taking that territory.
Very well said. So if we don't have any last questions, let me just check. Okay, so I think that's it for our discussion for tonight, Guy. Do you have any last words, any last wise words for the audience?
I don't know, really. I've enjoyed myself. I'm really thankful for the opportunity, and I'm thankful that people have stayed to listen. And I think for me, the most important thing is that don't sort of stick with what you're doing, because the world is changing around you. And by doing nothing, you're kind of moving backwards a little bit. And you don't need to completely reinvent your practice tomorrow, but you maybe need to think about a little bit of a plan over the next year or 2 or 3 about what your practice might need to look like to remain vital in the world as we move forwards, because we've seen unbelievable change in the last 12 months. And it would be naive to think that that's not going to impact on us in terms of how people want to interact with the world. But the flip side of that is, I would also say, don't be intimidated by it. Don't be intimidated by coming on webinars and seeing people make it look super easy, because it's not easy. And it's, we are definitely not making light work of it, and we're definitely not perfect. And we are always making mistakes, and our practices are slightly chaotic, and some of our team are unhappy, and we're dealing with noise and hassle all of the time. And that's okay. And it's okay to not be okay in that context, but just keeping moving forwards, because only by committing to little shuffles or big leaps forwards can you maintain a little bit of hope that you will keep going and stay viable and become more successful in the future. Because putting your head in the sand to churn out yet another cliche is just not going to work. And I worry slightly that in orthodontics we're a bit guilty of that. And I'm done. And I would thank you very much for your time and for the invitation. As I say, I'm super happy to be contacted, because I love talking about this stuff. I think it's really exciting. If anybody wants to drop me an email, I'm super happy to have my email shared, or you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook or any of that kind of stuff. And yeah, good luck. And I really hope you feel tempted to try it, because there's very little to lose by trying it. And you don't need to be a super duper, all digital, all this, all that. You just need to make a start.
Guy, it's always an absolute pleasure to have you. It's always an absolute pleasure to talk to you. For the listeners, if you're like me and you cannot get enough of this guy, I advise you to listen to one of our podcast sessions with him. It's actually our first ever episode of the DM podcast, and our event manager Mario is sharing the link down there. Please go listen to it. You can also listen to Guy's own private podcast, which is great, which I'm a big fan. And yeah, we're only receiving compliments in there. You know what? I also want to say another thing. When we started this webinar, we had 40 participants. We ended it with 44. So not only we didn't drop in numbers, it increased. Talk about retention.
We've multiplied. I don't know how that's
a first, only with human.
That's progress. Must have been some rabbits on the line. I don't know. Well, yeah, and that's great. So thank you so much again, and I thank you for all the kind comments. But I'm super enthusiastic about this stuff, and I hope it comes across. And we're very privileged in orthodontics that we have an amazing group of patients out there, either in treatment or waiting to come and see us. And making it easier for them to come and see us is game changing.
Thank you so much, Guy, and good luck with your early morning run.
Oh, I'm not. Yeah. Okay. Good night.
Easy on the drinks. Get good sleep.
Take care. Good night. Bye bye.
See you later. Bye bye.